Welcome back for this last part of getting ready for production. This part we're going to add some logging. So we're going to use Serilog as our logger. We're not going to use the structured logging part of it yet. We may use that later on, but we're not going to output to anything other than the console for now. So we're going to use the Serilog colored console sync. Now, once we have our logging set up, we can actually just log out to anything. We can log out to files, we can push to Kafka, all sorts of options with Serilog. We can even log out to Log4net or any traditional logging. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our static logger in Serilog. Now, we're not actually going to use the static logger directly in our classes. We're going to use the iLogger factory and the iLogger interfaces from Microsoft. So that means that we could actually switch out our logger from Serilog to anything else. So we'll set up our basic configuration here where we'll put our minimum level to info. We're going to write to our colored console and we'll enrich it from the log context. And then finally we create our logger. So that's our static logger created. Next thing we do is go to our configure method and we inject the iLogger factory. And then we're going to add Serilog to our iLogger factory. Now this is the point here that you could add any other logging framework or some of the built-in Microsoft ones or App Insights and all sorts of things and automatically push the same logging out to it. Means that we're not dependent on any one logging framework. We need to add the Serilog extensions so that we can get the extensions on our iLogger factory. So now we have that. It means that anytime we use the iLogger interfaces in ASP.NET, it will push out to that automatically. Now we can see that Microsoft already do a fair bit of logging behind the scenes. You can see here we're getting information logging coming out of Kestrel, and you can see that this is actually our health check getting hit. Now we'll take a look later on in ASP.NET 2 how to filter that. We could filter it here, but it's a lot easier in ASP.NET 2. So next thing, we are going to inject a logger into our health controller. So what we do is we've taken an iLogger factory, and then what we'll do is we'll call the generic method on the iLogger factory to get an instance which has the context of our methods, of our class. The reason for using the generic version rather than the non-generic version is that obviously it will get jittered out. So even though we call this every time, it's a bit of a hot path, it should get jittered out. The call to create logger will get jittered out and there won't be a reflection call every time to get the name of the class, etc. We're going to go ahead and add a scope. So all you do is you begin scope and then you give the scope some kind of context. So in our case, we're just going to give it a string, and the string will just be first scope. And what we'll show now is that you can have nested scopes and how they are displayed in the console logger, and how one nested scope doesn't have to understand the other scopes, and how the scopes are pretty much automatic. So in here we'll log an error, and we'll just call it in the method. And we'll throw a scope up around this. And this will be our second scope. And now the scope is disposable, which means that as soon as it's disposed, you've exited that scope, and we'll call it second scope. Throw that up around there. Then we'll call the sum method. And finally, we will add another log before we return. And we'll put that outside of both scopes. So we'll give this one a warning, just so we can see it pop up outside of all that information that's spewing out at the moment from Kestrel. So let's go ahead and run that and see what it looks like in the console now. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to put a template in, that's right. So by default, the template doesn't include the scope. So let's go ahead and put a template in where we've got the timestamp. And then we'll just we'll get rid of the date and time. We know what date and time it is today. Obviously in production you'll probably want the date and time. And then we'll put our level in. And finally we'll put our scope in. And then we'll put in our message and a new line. So let's go ahead and run that and see what it looks like now. So now you can see there on our health controller we've got an error and a warning, and what it says is first scope, second scope in the method, and the warning has no scope at all. So you can see there how it shows us nested scopes, which is quite useful if you've got like a method that you enter and then my spelling's not great on first scope. If you've got a method that you enter and then you're going to call out to say another web server, so you'd like to put a scope around that, and then if that's successful you call out to something else, and you sort of get nested down, and you don't actually have to understand that you're nesting down. The inner methods don't have to understand that they're nesting down, and you can see. Now, one other thing that's quite interesting is you can add a scope using middleware, which we might do later on, that has some kind of correlation ID, especially for service-to-service communication. It's always useful in a microservice environment to be passing a correlation ID through an HTTP header all the way around chains. And the reason for that is it makes it really quick to track it back if you've got centralized logging. Now, here what we're going to do is we're going to add a key now to console called logging. We'll say it was under our web apps configuration, so web apps /logging/minimum level, and we'll throw in information as our starting value, and then we're going to go back to our configuration here. We'll go ahead and we'll move our logging just above our configuration, and we're going to make something called a series switch, and in Serilog that's called a logging level switch. This allows us to change logging level in real time, and we'll start that off at information. Now we could actually start that off as the config value, but for now we'll just do it as information. We're going to add another updating path to our config registry, and we'll change the minimum level here. Instead of being a static minimum level, we'll say it's now controlled by the series switch. And we'll come down here and we will add a new updating path, which is our config that we just put in place. So config registry add updating path, and it was web apps, and then we'll just do a wait on that. And then what the next thing we'll do is we'll do config registry dot add a watch on a single key, and the key that we want to watch is going to be the logging level. So logging level and then colon minimum level, because we know that in configuration ASP.NET it flattens tree structures to have a colon in the middle, and then the value. So this action will be called every time that minimum level change, that key changes, and the value will be passed in as a string. So we'll just parse that out as one of the log levels, enums, and if that is a valid value, then we will change the minimum level to the new level, and that should be it. So let's go ahead and run that now and see what happens. Okay, start it up. So you can see we've got our info level logging, and we've changed the minimum level on the series switch. So now we've got error. Let's just go back to our window, pull this alongside here, and you can see how quickly it changes. So error, and now we change it to debug and update, and now you can see all the debug information coming through. And let's just change that back to warning, and you can see it changing back straight away. So that's it. That's logging that we're changing on the fly from a callback from the key value pair inside console. In our next series, we're going to move on to ASP.NET 2 and how we can make a nice server environment for deploying our web apps in, how we can provide an environment that allows developers to fall into a pit of success inside our on-prem environments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again.